Welcome everyone. We finally did it. I have reached 3,000 in chess.com puzzles rating for the first time. Amazing milestone I am very happy with. And one little bonus to it is actually puzzles was kind of my weakness for a long time. I'm much more of a positional player, so this is a really cool milestone. 3,000 is something that a lot of people can do with a lot of hard work. It took me many years to do it, but I'll show you specifically the main, I'd say top 3 things that kind of helped me go from the high 2,000s to 3,000 puzzle rating. Let's just get right into it and get started. So, here we have the first position I'll show. And in this first position, this also brings us to the first point, which the first thing I learned on this road to 3,000 was how to evaluate a position very quickly. And this isn't really something I was like consciously trying to do. It's just that you see so many puzzles, so many positions, and over time you just get really efficient at trying to, calculate material, see imbalances, and so all of that, I guess just comes up with practice. But this is a really good example because once you understand some of the main ideas, it makes solving the puzzle a lot easier. So, very first thing I like to do with every single puzzle is I like to count the material. Because it's the analysis board afterwards, so I can see the material up here. But when you're doing a puzzle, or when you're in a real game over the board, you don't actually know how much material is there. So you actually have to count. And this is something you can do, it just gets easier with practice. Maybe if everyone is interested, I'll actually make a video on how to count, simply count the material really quickly. Because it's something I've practiced over the years. But for the time being, if I were to just count the material real quickly, I can see we both have a queen. They have an extra rook than us. We both have a minor piece. They have 7 pawns. It looks like we have 4, so we're down by 3 pawns. But we also have, down a rook. So that's 8 points. So white is down 8 points of material here. 8 points is a lot. So what that means is we're not going for, trading down some positional advantage. We're not going into an endgame. We're not doing any of those small nuanced things because we're down 8 points of material. If we were to like do a bunch of stuff and win a pawn, or even if we were to win a piece, we're still down a ton of material. So that already takes away a lot of my options. It's like, okay, well, how do I equalize 8? I'm either going to win their queen, or I'm probably going to checkmate them. And here we have their queen on a4. Very far out of play. Doesn't look like there's any tactics, any kind of way that we could possibly win that queen. And so, yeah, we're probably going for checkmate here. It's probably some kind of mating net. And so here, their king does look pretty open. We do have some pressure, down here. And so you just start looking at some of the moves and how can you actually corral them to checkmate. So, if I was to actually look at this, actually go with it, one of the first moves I looked at was start calculating for queen h7. And then they are, probably going to go over to f8 or f7, it looks like here. F8 more likely because they don't want to walk onto the light squares and potential problems that way. And so these are kind of some of the thoughts that I have when I'm kind of solving this. And, in the real puzzle, I try and visualize it in my head before I make any of the moves. But here I'll actually put them on the board so, everyone can kind of follow along better than just drawing arrows. So I was looking at, well, okay, if I give a check here and then they go that way. Now, if they go to f7, like I said, this just walks into this check. And, they're going to probably go back anyway. It might not change much. In this case, it's checkmate right away. So, like, okay, so it's not that. But let's say here they go back to f8, which is, what I was originally saying. So in this case, we have to keep up the forcing ideas because we're down by 8. We have to play for checkmate here. We can't play slow stuff and win a pawn or something. So we're going to follow up with a check. That's the only way I really see to continue the attack. So queen h8 appeals to me there. And then king f7 is pretty natural. It's actually the only move here because these squares were controlled by the rook, so that was the only legal square they could go, which makes calculation easier. And maybe a lot of people would think, well, how can you continue the attack here? Because you would have had to visualize this all the way back. And I think it's actually pretty straightforward, at least for me when I was solving this. Because you have to keep attacking. Are there any other meaningful checks or meaningful ways you can keep corralling their king? And so rook e7, even though it's a sacrifice, it's a check that's luring their king out. Just very natural to me. So they do take. Now we have this check again. They come over. And now we bring our last piece into the game, which is bishop to g6 checkmate. And so all of this was actually a mate in 5. If we go back to the original position. But all this I visualized in my mind before I even played the first move. Because before I play queen to h7 check, I have to see all the way to checkmate. Because if somehow their king gets out of it, then, you know, basically my first move was probably wrong. And that means if I were to just like try and go move my move here, you know, playing this, and if that wasn't the correct idea, I would just get the puzzle wrong on the spot. So try and visualize things, you know, as you're, you know, starting the puzzle, and try and see if you can calculate pretty far and see if you can figure out the idea yourself. So kind of the first tip there was, and also that little bonus one that I just mentioned, kind of technique. Really the first tip is how to practice evaluating the position, and especially counting material very quickly. I think it's a very useful skill to have. But okay, we've already solved this puzzle, so let's go to the next example here. So this next example, we can do the exact same thing that we just did, was we, you know, have to count the material. And so here, it looks like black is actually up a piece, because both sides have a queen and rook, and they both have a bishop, but we have an extra knight, they don't, and both sides have 5 pawns. So material is equal here. Now, the advice that I'd like to give for this puzzle is whenever you have some kind of analysis and you're calculating, you know, various options, make sure to end your analysis with some kind of conclusion. You know, some kind of statement of, you know, who's winning, why you reject a line, why you think it's good. And that's a really big key for me, because when I started doing that a lot more often, like I sort of did it, you know, subconsciously, but I wasn't consciously saying, here's my advantage and why. But when I started really thinking that through in a very concrete way, it really helped me, because then I get to the point where just repetition, practice puzzle, puzzle, puzzle over and over, position, position, position over and over. You get to the point where you start to see so many trends in your thinking, and then you kind of realize either what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, or you get to the point where you realize kind of some common themes of what actually comes up when you're calculating. So that was a really useful skill, I thought. So here, you know, this puzzle is rated 3118, at least the time that I solved it. And so my thought process here, after I counted the material, was, okay, we're up a piece. Can we save the material? Because right now our queen is attacked. And so if we can get our queen out of harm's way, if we can save our material advantage, then we just have a better position and we should win. So in the first puzzle, you know, when we evaluated, it was very one-sided, and we knew we probably had to go for something extreme, such as checkmate or winning their queen. But here, we're actually up material. So we kind of might have to be a little on the defensive to see if we can just kind of survive this for the most part. So here, you know, they're definitely attacking our queen. That's the #1 threat we have here. And then ideally, I would like to save a piece. Now, originally I was thinking this, you know, knight over here, because it's so far out of play. So after I move my queen somewhere, can I save the knight? And so my thought process for this puzzle went something along these lines. So you look at forcing moves and checks, you know, so checks are the most forcing. Are there any checks? No. I can't play bishop here, that does not check, there's pawns in the way. You know, there's no queen through here, though there might be some kind of x-ray in the future. So there's no checks available. And so are there any other very forcing moves? Not really. And so that's not really going to help us here. Now, the next thing I looked at was, well, can this a2 knight escape? And right now it can't, because this square is controlled by the rook, and these squares are controlled by their queen or bishop. So that's also no good. And so I don't really see how I'm saving the knight, at least for the time being. But we do have the very big problem of their threat, right? You know, they're attacking our queen. And so now I have to kind of bring myself back and realize, okay, so how can I save the queen here and save the one piece that we're up? And then at that moment, it kind of occurred to me, this knight actually isn't the piece I should be concerned about. It's this bishop, because it's actually pinned right now because of the rook. And the problem is, if I move my queen somewhere, they can actually add pressure to this bishop with something like queen to e4. And so now I come starting to get the idea of this puzzle. And I think, okay, well, how can I save my queen and keep this bishop defended? Remember, I'm up material, so if I can trade, that'd be great. So I think, well, okay, well, what if I move my queen, say, to e6? Well, that's not going to work, because they'll just trade queens. And then after that, then they can grab my bishop here and equal, you know, materials equal. So that doesn't work. Now, can I move my queen somewhere else, right? Like, can I take this bishop? No, because after that, they just take my queen. I don't see any follow-up. So that doesn't look too good. Now, can I play queen to g5? And I think this is probably the move a lot of people got wrong on this puzzle, because I assume they probably thought that. And maybe if they were, you know, good on some basic one-move tactics, they would see, well, queen g5 might run into f4, and you might end your analysis there. But what I think might have tricked people was, if you're much higher rated in puzzles and tactics, you know, maybe like someone around 3,000 who would actually get these puzzles, you'd calculate a little further and you'd think, well, actually this fork is not a problem because I can just capture here and they can't take back because of the pin. But you have to keep going further. You have to, you know, analyze this as you go. You can't just end it in the middle of something, you know, one-sided like this, because they can capture back, and then you can move your queen here. And we've gotten the material back, but this is with check. So if I was going to add my thoughts on the end, this conclusion that I was referring to, they're down material with check, and this is just good for, you know, for us in this situation. So that kind of looks, you know, interesting, I guess you could say, at the very least. But only if they play it in this exact way. So this doesn't really seem too promising, I thought, because it looks good there, and I think that's where they get confused. But going back to the original idea, why doesn't that work? Because like that looks okay, you know, from the black side. Like if they do go into this move here, it looks like it's winning because you just give here and you give this check. But that's one variation, and I think this is where people get mixed up and probably got this puzzle wrong, because I don't have to play f4. You don't have to play this fork. That's the immediate thought because, you know, it's a way to, looks like it stops. But you play the original idea, queen to e4, and where's the follow-up? You know, black is up a piece, but this bishop is pinned, right? You can't move the bishop because if you don't move it, you know, they take, and then you drop back your piece. If you do move the bishop somewhere like here, there's actually back rank. They'll sacrifice their queen. You can't take back with your rook, because then they played their rook and that's checkmate. So that's no good. So this bishop is actually kind of a problem here, and I think probably most people probably went queen to g5 and got it wrong. At least that's my guess. So I think, okay, let's go queen f6. Can queen f6 work? You know, and you know, from looking at that, I think it does. I don't see any other way that we can hold the bishop, any meaningful way really. And so they're going to play queen to e4. And again, this is all visualization. I would have done this before, you know, I actually played this out. So they played queen to e4. And then I realized, well, okay, in this case here, you know, after they add more pressure to this, I want to move my bishop, so that way it's saved. But the problem is very similar to what we looked at. If I were to move the bishop somewhere, like let's say I'm attacking this rook here, you know, with bishop c3, the problem is they still have the same back rank idea. And, you know, this is all forced because I was checking. I get checkmated here. So that's no good. So I still can't save my bishop there. So can I save my bishop and stop the back rank problem? And there's one move. Yes, I can. I can play bishop to d6. And bishop d6 saves it because if they try and, you know, well, before I even show take, let's just show like the queen, right? Is the same idea doesn't work here because the whole point is I don't take their queen. If I take the queen, I'll get the back rank checkmate that I looked at. But I can block with the bishop. And so now I'm up material, and they have no follow-up. I'll just show the back rank in case people haven't seen it here. I'm forced to come back because of the bishop, and then they'll just take here, and this is defended. So that would be the checkmate I have to avoid. So back here, what I have to do is, you know, block with the bishop if they give a check on e8. Okay, so problem solved. So what happens if they take? And so if they take, I don't want to run into back rank problems, right? If I bring the rook up, I still get checkmated on e8. If I take with the pawn, same thing. They sacrifice here, and I get checkmated. And so the only move that saves it is actually just queen captures d6. And that was the puzzle. And although my knight is out of play, you know, you can always come back something like this, and my queen is defending it. You know, and so if my knight can come back, you know, then basically we're just up a piece. But just that thought process that you're kind of going through while you solve these puzzles, you look at all the variations, and you go much further, you know, and try and calculate as far as you can, but you add your insight at the very end. You add that little conclusion. You know, like I was saying here, you know, I think the critical moment, actually a little further back, yeah, here, instead of this, I think this was the critical line, where a lot of people probably saw f4, and they think, well, f4, okay, it looks like this is just a trade, and this is probably fine, you know, it doesn't work, and black is better because of this check. And maybe they reject it for that reason, but you have to look at all the variations. You know, they're not obligated to play f4. And so a move like queen e4, you know, they add more pressure to this, you know, bishop. And that kind of ties into the first tip of advice I gave, because if you didn't evaluate at the very beginning, way back here when this puzzle started, when they played bishop c5, you know, and I started evaluating, I counted the material, right? You wouldn't know that this key was saving this bishop if you hadn't done that. So then when I did play this, I was fine, but I knew that queen e4 was a move because I already foresaw they're going to add pressure to this bishop and be consistent with their plan. So now I'll go to the very last one that I was going to show and kind of discuss the last tip of advice that I have for kind of trying to solve these puzzles. Okay, so now in this puzzle here, this is an interesting moment because my tip of advice here is how long you actually take on a puzzle. And this isn't something that most people really give much thought to. They just try and solve the puzzle the best they can. But I've noticed that, when I was, high 2000s in puzzles for a while, I would just try to solve them and I would try and get the target time, and that was pretty good for the most part. But the problem is, a lot of my peers were spending a little bit longer on puzzles. They were really trying to understand it, even if it meant like double the target time or some much longer time. And that makes sense, right? My mindset was, if I can't figure it out now, I'm not going to solve it because it's not in my pattern recognition. But I think I shouldn't have done it so quickly, right? Like I should have, I think, tried to work through it a little longer and figure it out. So in this example here, this puzzle, when I got this in my puzzles, it actually took me a little over 18 minutes to solve. In the past, either I would have done very quickly, almost tried to solve it in like a minute and then not seen it and played a wrong move, or I would have taken way too long. I think a lot of people, they think, I'm going to take my time in this puzzle, make sure I get it right, and they spend hours on one puzzle. And although you might think that might help you, and if you solve it, that's great, the problem is it's really not in your pattern recognition. You just don't understand the puzzle, and you can try and figure it out. But if you're spending an hour on one puzzle, you just probably don't know it. And it might actually help you to just try after, 20 minutes, half hour, just make your best guess on the move and then put it in the analysis board afterwards and see why you got it right or why you got it wrong and kind of work your way through it. And then you just saved yourself half hour. You could have been solving other puzzles. So long term, I think you do want to test yourself, but you don't want to be spending like an hour or more on one puzzle. If you're spending maybe half hour to an hour, that's pretty long, but I wouldn't spend any longer than an hour on one puzzle. So that's kind of my next bit of advice. Now, to show this actual puzzle here, this one actually really impressed me. Because when I did find the solution, it was 18 minutes of thinking, but then it was a very pleasing solution. I was very happy to find this. So, yeah, this is a very pleasing one, I thought. What this actually is, which I didn't know at the time, but I'm not shocked afterwards, it's a famous endgame study. Henry Rink from 1916 had this exact puzzle. And this is an interesting thing, because when I first started, when I looked at this, I thought, okay, well, their king is so close to the edge, which is part of our evaluation, that, it's probably going to be some kind of mating net or some kind of checkmate. Because if we count material, I have 6 and they have 6, so material's equal, right? So I didn't think it was anything like, trying to win a small nuance. It's like their king is on the edge, and we probably want to take advantage of this somehow. Or we can win their rook in some way. Both of those would be a winning advantage, because we can do 2 bishops checkmate, and this pawn, we can always get our king in front and block, or we can grab with one of the bishops. So this pawn isn't really a big deal for me. So really, I want to go for checkmate, or, win the rook. So is there a checkmate possible? Well, right now our bishop is attacked. But if we were to move our bishop somewhere, we are actually threatening a checkmate. We're actually threatening this check, with the bishop, and depending where they are, that might actually be checkmate. So the best move, I thought, here was we have to play something forcing, and bishop to e7 is the idea that saves our bishop, so they can't capture our bishop, but now we're threatening this checkmate. And this is checkmate because their king has nowhere to go, and it can't go here because, don't forget our bishop is still on the square. So in that case, we're thinking, well, this is actually looking kind of promising now. Are we that close to a mating net? They can't really do much. It's not like they can go here because we still just play this checkmate. Other way, if they try rook here, then we can probably just take it, and then we're fine because, they just come up somewhere. It doesn't matter. We'll just save our bishop, and it's 2 bishops checkmate. So really, it looks like they don't really have much of a move other than a rook check. And so the only rook check that doesn't lose some material right away is rook d4 check. But now this is the moment where I took a long time. I mean, most of my thinking time in this puzzle was thinking on this problem, where I don't want to move my king too far, right? Because I want to keep their king boxed in so that I can threaten this checkmate with bishop to f7. The problem with that is I can't really play here, because if I just play like king f5, then they can actually just give a check. And this is super annoying, because if they give this check, I thought, well, can I just take this? But that's a stalemate, because their king has no legal moves here. And so that actually kind of ruins my plans. And if I just like come back or something, you know, like here, you know, they just hold everything, you know, and wherever they go, it's like there's no mating net anymore. Their king can escape, and I haven't really solved anything. You know, like they could even attack my bishop or something. So I thought this was problematic, and I couldn't really find a way to continue other than the check. And then I thought, well, can I threaten the rook, right? Because I'm either going for checkmate or win the rook. So I have king to e5 or king e3. And this is where I spent over 10 minutes of my time. I just couldn't work out which way was correct and why. And if it had taken me like an hour, it probably would have been just better for me to just quit the puzzle right there, just pick one, and then put it in the analysis board afterwards. However, I spent about 18 minutes, and I did solve it correctly. But like I said, if I had spent like 2-3 times that long, maybe I would just consider just playing a move and kind of guessing at it. So just to show, really cool idea. This puzzle really fascinated me, because when I finally figured it out, it was a pretty cool idea. Now, what's so cool about this and what I had to calculate was all the places the black rook could go, because I realized the rook is actually trapped regardless of where it goes if we go king e3. Because like here, this rook has to stay on the d file. You know, I won't show too many things, but let's just say, for example, they go to rook a6. So if they went rook a6, we can play something like bishop f7, and then we start threatening them. You know, there's still like a checkmate type thing, so they have to block with the rook. And when they block with the rook, now we just play a waiting move. And so we can just play something like bishop d6, you know, anything really, and their king has to abandon the rook, right? Their king has to move somewhere, we'll win this, and it's going to be an easy checkmate, no problem. So that was one thing, but I had to look at kind of all these squares they could go to and realize they have to stay on the d file, like this check. And so when they play here, I have king to e3, with the point being that it takes away the d2 square. And this rook cannot stay on the d file. All these squares I had to calculate for, and all of them I'm fine. And they, you know, they had to stay on the d file. So this is just such a cool idea that the rook is actually trapped. You know, it can't go to d8 because their bishop would have taken it. Same thing with d6, the bishop would take. Same thing with d5. You know, this bishop would take here. These squares are controlled by the king, and then this square is controlled by our bishop. And then the very last square here, if they were to go back to d7, I can just show it real briefly. We just played this check. They have to move their king, but the problem is, because this diagonal for the bishop, they have to move their king to g4, and then we play this check and we fork the rook, which is really cool. So it's like, okay, wow, so you really had to calculate kind of all those options there. And so this is why, going back, you had to play king e3. And if you had played king e5, the difference is now they have the d2 square. And that makes all the difference, because now they can just keep shuffling on the d file. And so this would be a draw, whereas with king e3, you're forcing checkmate because the rook is trapped. Basically what I'm saying is, when you take your time on these puzzles, you know, try and spend as much time as you need. If you like lost the target time, so what? Like if you have, say, a minute for the target time of the puzzle, you know, so what if you take 2 minutes? So what if you take 3 minutes? Just don't spend like over an hour on one puzzle, because then that's kind of on the other side of the extreme, and then that's probably too long in my opinion. So, you know, give it some time, and like this puzzle, even if it took me 18 minutes, I think that's probably fine, even though it's on the longer end. I've spent half hour, 45 minutes on one puzzle. I'm sure many other people have before too. And sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. But I wouldn't be spending, you know, over an hour or days, as some people literally do on one puzzle, where they just put it down and they come back to it later. Kind of my tips for time management for these puzzles. Now, on that note, I'll just really briefly say how long it took me on these. I actually wrote it down here. So on this puzzle that I showed earlier, this, you know, checkmate one, the target time on this puzzle was 53 seconds, and the average time that people took on this was 1:23. So you can see most people didn't hit the target time. And for myself, it took me 57 seconds. So a little under a minute, I was able to calculate everything and find the forced checkmate in 5. But it wasn't too much longer than, you know, what was recommended, and that was okay. Now if we go to this puzzle, sorry, go back here, starting with start position of it. If we go to this puzzle, for this one, the target time was 41 seconds. The average time was 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Most people were taking much longer on this puzzle. You know, it's a difficult one. You have a lot of nuances to work out. my time was 3 minutes and 49 seconds. So I took a little longer than average, but I got it right, you know, so it doesn't really matter too much. I took a little bit longer, you know, than the target time. That's just the estimate of what kind of you should be aiming for, but not necessarily, you know, is it a big deal if you miss it. And then going back to this one here, the very nice endgame study that we have from 1916 here. This one, the target time was 42 seconds. The average time was 1:52. So again, a lot longer. And then, of course, I took over 18 minutes. I took 18 minutes and 3 seconds on it. So sometimes, you know, you'll take a lot longer. And my point is that's okay. As long as you're not spending like a huge amount of time on one puzzle, you know, and then you just keep trying and keep learning. You know, you do puzzles over and over enough. And eventually, you know, you do make progress, you know, as the 3,000 I've finally reached is evidence of. So it's a very nice goal I'm very happy with, and I'll see you in the next chess video.